What's up everyone, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necroc, and I'm back with some more underrated albums. And I decided to do something a little bit different this time. Generally when I go to death metal, I just kind of do death metal as a whole. This time I'm going to focus just on Blackened death metal. I figured this actually gives me a little bit more room to talk about like the individual fusions a little bit more in depth rather than just kind of bouncing from one style of death metal to the next style of death metal. And still within Blackened death metal, you get a lot of variance, which was something I was trying to go for in here in terms of different styles of Blackened death metal, like different approaches, some that lean heavily more on black metal, some of them lean heavily more on death metal. And surprisingly, there's a fair amount of Australian bands on here, which was weird because I did not target Australia at all in this specifically. I just went for albums I think that need a little bit more attention or I just feel are underrated. And a good chunk of them ended up being Australian. Go figure. But anyway, let's get into this. The Wretched End Inroads. This is the second album from this Norwegian band that features Samoth of Emperor and Zyklon B, or just Zyklon. This is another one of his actually both of those bands. This started off as more of a death thrash project, especially on their first album, but this kind of slowly morphed more into Blackened death metal, but very thrashy Blackened death metal. So there's a lot of stuff on here that is just high energy chugathons, but on here they started throwing in a little bit more atmospheric stuff, a little bit more distant riffing, and pretty much kind of pushed the Blackened aspects just a little bit more, but pummeling riff work. This is one of those bands I think that leans a little bit more towards the death metal side. Honestly, a good chunk of this reminds me of Vader, except with, Blackened elements. Or you get songs like Death by Nature, which is groovy triplet chug city. It's almost like Blackened Bolt Thrower, which actually sounds pretty cool. Most of the songs here are more about riffs and, again, like more of a big death metal tone. Not a lot of just like laying on the tremolo for atmosphere, but the pockets of atmosphere and even some clean vocals on here. I believe it's the track Blackthorn Winter. Kind of give it a little bit more of a Blackened feel. But overall, this is a pummeling album. I'm not entirely sure they're still together. I believe they're listed as active, but it's been a while since their last release. And I'm not entirely sure if it's just, Samoth is, divided amongst different projects. I know Emperor gets together for live shows at least. But I would love to hear more from this band. I have their first album, I believe, and I know they have maybe 2 other follow-ups to this, but I'm definitely down for more of this band. If you have never checked this band out and you like your death metal thrashy, but also Blackened, pretty solid one right here. Check them out. Summon Fallen. This is the 5th release from this Michigan act, and also their most recent release. They actually have a bit of a history of breaking up and reforming. In fact, they broke up not too long after this album, but have since reformed in 2010, though I don't think they've recorded anything new, at least nothing that I've heard. But this is some ferocious, thrashy, Blackened death metal, but not like Wretched End. This actually is a little bit more towards bands like Angel Corpse. And, well, actually, Angel Corpse. It sounds a lot like Angel Corpse. It is furious, high energy, almost at all times. This really just lays a pace of just blast beats, shrieks, and really, really solid riffing. Now, as thrashy as this is, I would not call it Blackened thrash, and with all the death metal elements in there, I would not call it death thrash. This is Blackened death metal just done in such a furious pace. This is kind of similar to Deicide in a way, except again, kind of have that Angel Corpse snarl to it. It's just vicious from start to finish. Now, most of the tracks in here are just short and aggressive. There are some longer ones, but generally they're longer because they have some big atmospheric sort of, lead in or fade out. I believe the last track, Beating of Christ, is the longest track on here, but most of it is a fade out. But that song just brings in some of the most aggressive music that's on the entire album. There's even some gravity blasts on there that just make it extra heavy, as if it really needed to be extra heavy. Pretty much if you're looking for Blackened death metal that'll give you the stank face when you hear the riffs, this album. Definitely check it out. Vicious as hell. I would love to see these guys get back together and record some new material, because as a leaving off point, this only makes me excited to hear more from this band if they still have all this energy, and I really hope they do. So yeah, if you need something absolutely vicious, I strongly recommend checking this one out. It's badass. Beyond Terror, Beyond Grace, Nadir. This is the 3rd and final album from this Australian Blackened death metal band. that did not start off as a Blackened death metal band at all. In fact, this was the only release they did that was a Blackened death metal release. They started off as a grindcore / death grind band. And honestly, I haven't heard any of that material. This is the only thing I own by them, but I thought this was such a killer album that I had to bring it up. This is very atmospheric, very depressive Blackened death metal with some absolutely furious drumming. Actually, listening to the drumming on this, it kind of makes sense that they were at one time a grind band, because this drumming is just intense, like flying turnovers and blast beats all over the place. It just kind of screams, you know, like Marduk, but also awesome. But again, I haven't heard their death grind material. I've heard this, and this just labors thick, droning, dissonant, ugly guitars, big shouts into the void. The first 3 tracks in here are 8 minutes long, and they just really labor long, droning sections, but they don't get boring. It actually, in fact, kind of builds in intensity. I would say this is very comparable to a band like Ulcerate. It's very bleak, very oppressive. And there's some stuff in here that really kind of sounds almost more post-black metal, like stuff like Harakiri from the Sky. In fact, the track Throatless Sirens has lots of cool, like, sort of atmospheric pauses and cleaner vocals, but that sort of oppressive nature there kind of gets a little neurosis-y at times. And the instrumental title track really shows off a lot more melody. In fact, the next track on there, Embracing Null, I think is flat out amazing. It kind of balances out all the, like, brutal, oppressive stuff to just really cool melodies, like very depressing melodies, but really, really good. Now, unfortunately, this band would break up not too long after this release. This came out in 2012 on Willowtip. And unfortunately, that was it. I really would have loved to hear more in this direction, because as a first attempt in terms of trying something completely different than what they were doing, they did a really good job. And honestly, it fits in a lot with a lot of the cool stuff that's coming out of the Australian scene in terms of black metal, Blackened death metal, post-metal, all that cool, dissonant, ugly stuff. If this had come out now, I think this would be embraced a little bit more, but again, kind of changing around their sound, they might have alienated their fan base a little bit. But I really dig this. I strongly recommend checking it out, especially if you're a fan of Harakiri from the Sky or Ulcerate. This is definitely up that alley. Strongly recommend it. Check it out. Marjorden, The Unsettling Dark. This is the full-length debut from this, well, Montana, but then Colorado. In fact, I think they moved to Denver sometime around the release of this album, I believe. This is melodic death metal meets modern death metal and black metal. It's kind of an interesting sound. It has very modern production. In fact, it's not very, you know, echoey, not a tremendous amount of reverb, more compressed, more tight sounding. The drum work on there is definitely more along the lines of like modern death metal. I don't think the drums are triggered, but they definitely have like a big, punchy, compressed sound. But this band did a great job blending all those styles. Their use of keyboards was actually pretty good. They weren't overbearing. They didn't, you know, saturate the entire mix, and they were good at adding atmosphere. And these guys were great at melody. The song Ascension Part 2, which Part 1's really good. It's, you know, more just beat down, heavy death metal. But when you get to Ascension Part 2, it is this giant, soaring, epic melody that really just builds. And man, when it came down to melodic aspects on here, they really just wrote some killer melodies. And it's kind of cool that both Ascension songs are kind of two different sides of their sound, because these guys aren't afraid to get technical. They aren't afraid to throw in like big, chuggy breakdowns. And they aren't afraid to get super melodic or even kind of death doomy with A Season in Hell, which actually kind of sounds a bit like Paradise Lost. But this album I like because it is kind of different for Blackened death metal. It definitely leans heavily on the death metal parts, but it's very chuggy and riffy, and again with the more streamlined production, it kind of has a very different sound. I'm not entirely sure what happened to this band after this. I know they've released some other stuff, but I haven't really heard it. I think most of their stuff's only available digitally, but I mean, I need to look more into this because I only have this and the debut EP, which is also awesome. I'm not entirely sure they even sound the same anymore. Looking at some of the album artwork, I don't know what they're pushing for, but it doesn't look like Blackened death metal anymore, at least in terms of like a first glance. But I strongly recommend this one. This is a fun album, riffs aplenty and insane drum work. Really dig it. Definitely check it out. Impious Baptism, Wrath of the Apex Predator. This came out in 2013 on Hell's Headbangers. This is a one-man Australian Blackened death metal act, and pretty sure he's got to be talking about the wildlife there. It's the crocodiles. It's got to be the crocodiles that are the apex predator because, well, I don't know, everything's terrifying there. Either way, pretty sure it's the crocodiles. Now, the one man behind this is Jaro Raphael. It might be Yaro. I'm not entirely sure. But he is the one-man instrumentalist behind all this. In fact, he plays in Coffin Dust and Nocturnal Graves as well, both of which I really like. Now, this definitely leans more on the black metal side. The production is way more raw. The guitars are way more gainy. The vocals, loaded with reverb, but they're kind of pushed in the back of the mix, which kind of gives it this interesting effect. It kind of sounds like the ominous voice in the darkness that's just sort of echoing through a big haunted house or something like that. I don't know. It definitely works with the mood, and atmosphere is kind of a big part in this. Sometimes a little bit too much. You get some long interludes after tracks or at the beginning of tracks, but it does have some cool appeal to it in terms of like droning synths, but they're the kind of synths that kind of scream like second wave Norwegian black metal. So in terms of like giving it that, again, ominous atmosphere, I think that really helps it. Really solid album. I especially like the last 3 tracks in here, which are the title track, Rites of Illuminated Death and Temple of Necromancy. I think those last 3 in particular show off a little bit more in terms of songwriting and dynamics. Again, maybe a little bit heavy on the atmospheric sections, which it's not just like, you know, the band or him generating atmosphere with a lot of the musical instruments. It's a lot of like droning synths and like screams and, you know, it's cool for effect, but I want more music. And while most of this is definitely 100% musical, they, you know, some of the atmospheric stuff, it kind of carried a little bit too long, but that is literally my only gripe on here. This is raw, ugly, blackened death metal that leans heavily on the blackened side, and I'm a big fan of that. Now, unfortunately, I don't know what's going on with this project. In fact, it's been listed as unknown for a while. This is the only full length from the band. I believe there are 2 other EPs. But I figure with the amount of projects this gentleman is in, maybe time constraints were kind of a part of it. So this is still kind of listed as an unknown, but I recommend checking this out. Really solid release. And if you like your blackened death metal a little bit more on the black metal side, right here, check it out. Lightning Swords of Death, Baphometic Chaosium. This is the 3rd and most recent release from this band, came out in 2013. They are from LA, and their style of blackened death metal is drenched in atmosphere and creepiness, but very riffy and very hook-laden. And even somewhat technical. The opening track, the title track, leads in with some really cool crawling bass licks. And instantly that had me hooked just because you don't really hear that sort of play in blackened death metal. But if you love blackened death metal in general, I think you probably really dig this. You get the big droning riffs, you get really twisted dark vocals that are drenched in reverb. And the vocals are really cool because you get, you know, shrieks, you get low growls, you get chants that are somewhat tuneful, and you even get some maniacal laughter too, which, I mean, when you hear that listening to something super creepy like this, why not creep you out a little bit more? This is definitely kind of more of like a balance between black metal and death metal. I don't think it leans as heavily on one side though. I mean, there are some songs in here that definitely seem more death metal oriented, but most of it is a really cool blend. And I mean, songs like Acid Gate and Psychic Waters lay on that dissonant, layered tremolo sort of sound and just sort of build this giant, cavernous, evil sounding blackened death metal. But it's cool to hear this mostly be musically atmospheric, that's not just samples and such, except for Cloven Shields, which is a bit of an interlude song, but honestly, it doesn't really take much from the album, but I bitch about interludes like that. I just want to keep getting on to the music, and the music on here is absolutely fantastic. There's lots of cool, like, descending and ascending dissonant tremolo riffs that don't seem very musical at all or very tuneful unless you listen to this sort of music, but I like how they are layered and I guess harmonized. I don't know if that's the right word because I don't think they were going for any sort of blissful harmony whatsoever on this. This is just about creepy atmosphere, blast beats, and just being evil as fuck. But that doesn't mean it's without its own catchy hooks. The song Oaken Chrysalis especially has this old school sort of just groovy stomp to it. It doesn't lay on the blast beats or anything like that, and it's a very riff-driven song. This is a killer album, and I believe they're still active, but they haven't put out anything since this, and again, this came out in 2013 on Metal Blade Records. So I don't really know what's happened to this band, but I know I miss them because I picked up the one before this and I really liked it, and I thought this was even more of an improvement on it. So hopefully these guys get back together and record another beast of an album like this, because this is actually killer and you should check it out. Necros, Christos, Doom of the Occult. This is the second album from this German Blackened Death Doom act. Now I thought about, throwing this more in the Death Doom pile, but the Blackened aspects in here, I think, kind of made it more fitting here. Even though the music is, well, definitely different than a lot of the stuff on here. This is more slow, more, mid-paced in terms of like the fastest moments on here. You're not going to get a ton of blast beats and walls of tremolo riffing like you would on most black and death metal albums. Now, this band is very interesting, and they're very, very in love with interludes. There are, I believe, 23 tracks on here, but most of them, unfortunately, are gates and temples. That's the name of the interludes on there. It's not as though they're bad, there's just too many of them. Because, I don't know, it's just kind of strange. I think the gates are more musically experimental. You get stuff that sounds like Middle Eastern music, or even Indian music. Like you hear sitars and ouds, and the atmosphere is very interesting on those. But when you get down to the temples, and I might have these flipped, the temples are more of, Gothic church organs and such to set up the next song, and the songs themselves are absolutely awesome. I really love the songwriting here. The vocals are very raw sounding, but very deep and kind of throaty. And of course, with the Death Doom elements, you get big, slow, nasty Death Doom breaks. I mean, the breakdown on Ball of Ekron, which a lot of these song titles are very occultish. They're kind of strange. Succumbed to Sacrum Fagum, Doom of Kalima. I had to make that reference. I saw that, and that's where my brain went. But this is a really cool release. It's just kind of overloaded with extra stuff. And, when the songs are on, they're absolutely killer, but the other stuff kind of feels a little bit out of place sometimes. Sometimes they set up the songs beautifully, and you get this giant wave of bleakness. And other times you're like, well, that was a cool interlude by maybe a different band. But overall, I really like this release, and I do want to get, I believe, at least their first album. They just broke up this year again, sadly, and I would have loved to have seen this live, maybe minus all the gates and temples. And just, the gates and temples are cool, just less of them, please. But when you get down to the meat of the album, the really nasty, dark, blackened Death Doom, it's really rewarding, solid songwriting, and just heavier than hell. So, if you have never heard of this band, again, like always, I recommend checking them out. Destructor Opprobrium. This came out in 2015. This is the second album from this band that is very Australian. In fact, they are so Australian, the name of the town that they're from is called Kangaroo Flat, and I dare you to be more Australian than that. Now, this is interesting because it ties into Impious baptism, because at one point the gentleman that is in charge of that project, Yarrow, again, not entirely sure how to say his name, but he actually played drums in this band for a little bit, but not on this release. This is some very thrashy, very gainy, again, leaning more towards the black metal side spectrum of black and death metal. Now, I like this one because it's a little bit punky. There's a lot more D beats on here, and I'm a sucker for D beats. I mean, those are classic pit spinning rhythms right there. And I like the fact that there are some really cool thrashy riffs on here, but you still have those deep kind of slightly cavernous lower vocals that give it more of a death metal edge. And when it comes down to the groovier pockets on here, they definitely scream more death metal. Now, if you haven't guessed by the album cover, these guys are not huge fans of organized religion, and yeah, no, they're really not trying to hide it. But honestly, that's kind of to be expected in black and death metal. That is kind of a theme throughout most black metal, at least. Now, when it comes down to the music on here, the songs are generally very short, very aggressive, very in your face. In fact, they really don't mess around too much with atmosphere. They pretty much save it all for the last track, Forever the Blood Shall Flow. And that one, being over 8 minutes, pretty much packs in every dynamic you might have wanted on here anyway. Again, the rest of the stuff, kind of more punky. This actually shows off some really cool songwriting on it, and honestly one of my favorite tracks on here. But I really dug the overall energy on this. This is just fast, in your face, not a lot of atmosphere. There's not a lot of like interludes to set up the next song. It just goes, and I really dug that. Now, I believe this band is still around, and hopefully they put out some more stuff, because this is some really just, again, straightforward, aggressive, blackened death metal, and I really dig that sort of thing. So if you dig that sort of thing, definitely check it out. Volcandra, Under a Frozen Sun. This is the second album from this German band, came out in 2011. And this band features Stefan Kummerer from Obscura, and even has Seraph from Dark Fortress on drums. And this is straight up melodic blackened death metal, and these guys love Dissection almost as much as they love the color blue, because all their album covers are blue. That's the joke I'm making here. But why not love Dissection? Dissection's an amazing band, and they put out at least 2 absolutely amazing releases that I absolutely love, and that is the style they embody. Very melody driven, but it's very dreary. Like, everything kind of about this is very somber and cold. It does have its like fiercely heavy moments. In fact, at its heaviest and its most focused on the death metal side, it really kind of sounds like a really dreary version of Hypocrisy. And actually the production on here kind of reminds me a bit of Hypocrisy. It's not quite like Peter Tägtgren's, Token style, but it's very close. It's mixed really well, everything's separated well, and the big cool thing on here that I love are the melodic harmonies that are all over the place. Again, very dreary. There's nothing that's very uplifting on here, but it's blackened death metal. Even if it's melodic, it should still be kind of dark and foreboding, and maybe a little depressing too. I mean, hell, the title track on here, it's almost like a bleak death metal waltz. The rhythm kind of follows this cool waltzy pattern. But again, I really dug this. I really dig all their albums. I think this is probably the best of the 3 that are currently out, unless they put out another one that I missed. I believe they only have 3 full lengths. Again, all of them with blue covers, because they like blue. But they also like riffs, and that's kind of the cool thing, where this doesn't just drone on tremolo riffs all the time. They really like really well-written riffs and really just hook-laden songs. And again, it's Stefan from Obscura. He knows how to write very catchy pieces. And I like the fact that he dials down all the technical elements and saves that for Obscura, because this is great being as straightforward as it is. If you're a big fan of melodic death metal and black metal and Dissection, for damn sure, and Hypocrisy, we'll throw that in there, definitely check this band out. Check out all 3 of the releases, but I think this is the strongest by far. Check it out. And finally, we have The Funeral Pyre, The Nature of Betrayal. This came out in 2006. This is this band's second album, and this is one where the current status is kind of unknown. They haven't put out an album since 2010, so it has been a minute. Now, this is an interesting one, especially during the time it came out. Now, 2006, this was kind of where the metalcore boom was really hitting, and there was a lot of melodic death metal at the time, and this band kind of embraced both of those. There's definitely a lot of stuff on here that reminds me of bands like Black Dahlia Murder, Darkest Hour, and Bleeding Through, though I think this band is less accessible than them, just in terms of them being a little bit more harsh. The vocals are more shrieked across the board, the production's more raw, and the gothic synths on there, they definitely seem like they were trying to go for more of, again, kind of that second wave feel, like maybe early Satyricon, at least as far as like the keys on here. So for like, people just getting into blackened death metal or just getting into melodic death metal with those bands that I mentioned, this was kind of a stepping stone to possibly some more raw stuff. Songs in here are pretty well written, they're very riff oriented. The production here I don't necessarily like, especially I think the drums sound kind of loud in the mix, and the guitars sound a bit raw for all the more intricate melodies they're going for. But overall, I really like the songwriting, and this one had like a big impact on me, because when I was getting into all the metalcore and melodic death metal stuff, I really wasn't listening to much black metal. And to be honest, I picked this up because it was on Prosthetic Records, which at that point, they were putting out all sorts of stuff that I liked. Like I got into All That Remains, and that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. Not the best example. Anyway, it got me into stuff that was a little bit different, but still very heavy, and it still had elements of the stuff I was already listening to, so this was kind of a good stepping stone. Now, I do like how aggressive this is, but I like the shifts between like aggressive and melancholy, especially the song Stealing the Air of Life. there's some really good dynamics in there. Now again, this band has not put out anything since 2010, so I'm not entirely sure they're still around, but they do have, I believe, 3 full lengths. I have 2 of them. They're both really good. And eventually I'm just gonna have to get that last one I'm missing just because I'm missing it. That's enough of a reason. But yeah, if you're looking for some, again, kind of different Blackened death metal, it definitely has all the Blackened death metal tropes, but you get a little bit of that melodic death metal and kind of metalcore sound. Again, it was kind of an interesting time in 2006 in terms of like trends in metal, but yeah, definitely check this out. Solid release. All right, that knocks out another one of these. I think I'm gonna start breaking up these a little bit more in terms of like fusion genres, like death thrash, death grind, death doom, and then do the same thing for all the Blackened ones too. That'll give me more to talk about and, you know, more albums to go over, because these are a lot of fun to go through, because I got to go through stuff I haven't listened to in a while and sort of reapproach it, you know, as maybe a more cultured listener. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. It just, you know, I'm older now. I think that's probably the right way to say it. I'm old and my tastes have changed and I'm old. But I think I appreciate some of the stuff on different levels now, and I appreciate different aspects now. So again, these are fun to go through, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do next, but I will probably do something, that's for damn sure. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you would like to help us out there will be a link below in the description. There will also be a link for our giveaway. Once we hit 7,500 subs, we're going to give away this nice stack of CDs with the new Cannibal Corpse with the extra dirty, naughty cover, because it's a cool collector's item. Get the dirtier cover. I have the censored cover, and I kind of want that one, but we're giving it to you guys. And might as well say thank you for getting us this far. We are over the 7,100 mark, which is, again, much bigger than I thought this channel will ever be, but it is all due to you guys, and we thank you so much for all your views, all your comments, everything. You guys rule. And we also have t-shirts available. Hit us up on thrallsofmetal@gmail.com. We're going to order some more here soon, but we still have extra large, 2X large, maybe a small in there. But we're eventually going to load up on some more and probably get some other stuff with our brand on it. So with that, I once again thank you all for watching, and we will catch you later.